That day, my husband's former fiancée and I were both involved in a car accident. My husband, the head of the emergency department, personally pushed his former fiancée into the operating room, leaving me in a pool of blood. He said, "I am a doctor, I can handle it." Thus, he saved his former fiancée first. Now that I can truly endure, he no longer has the right to approach me. I heard the sound of bones fracturing. In that instant, I had no time to scream. The passenger seat was entirely contorted from the impact, and as the airbag deployed, I was already trapped in place. Blood surged from the rupture in my abdomen, warm and viscous, as though spilling directly from my internal organs. Wendy lay in the back seat, her head having struck the window, sobbing hysterically, "It hurts. Henry. Henry." Someone called for help. Another voice exclaimed, "It's his wife, it's Claire, she's bleeding." As I was wheeled into the emergency corridor, blood dripped from the stretcher, forming a continuous line. I heard someone shouting, "Trauma team." 2 critically injured women require immediate resuscitation. One of them is Director Henry's wife, Claire. The crowd fell momentarily silent. Then all eyes turned in one direction. Henry had arrived. His white coat fluttered, his mask hung from one ear, and his gaze was as cold and sharp as a blade. When I saw him, my heart jolted upward. Despite being covered in wounds and my vision darkening, I believed in that moment that he would rush toward me. Yet his first glance was directed at her Wendy. Unconscious, her brows tightly furrowed, she murmured faintly, "It hurts." Preliminary diagnosis: Wendy is suspected of having a concussion, fractured ribs, and unstable consciousness. Claire has an abdominal laceration, significant blood loss, unstable respiration, and decreasing blood pressure. And in turn began, Director Henry, based on blood pressure priority, Claire, but Henry's voice cut through, "Push Wendy in first," silencing everyone. The scene froze. Some faces paled, others opened their mouths to speak, but Henry suppressed them with a single statement, "I am the highest authority in this emergency response, obey my orders." But, the intern's voice quavered, "If Dr. Claire waits any longer, she might go into shock." "She's a doctor, she can endure," Henry replied calmly, as if discussing a routine surgery's risk assessment. "If Wendy remains unconscious too long, postoperative recovery difficulty will increase exponentially, impacting her nervous system." 1 second, 2 seconds. Everyone fell silent. I heard my own blood dripping onto the stretcher, producing a patter sound. My heartbeat slowed and softened in rhythm with the sound of dripping blood, yet my hearing became unprecedentedly acute. I sensed that no one dared to speak. I heard the words, "Claire can endure," strike my chest like a hammer. Then I saw him turn and personally wheel Wendy into the emergency room, his movements as gentle as if cradling a fragile treasure. A nurse hesitated as she pressed a hemostatic pack to my chest, her face pale. "Sorry, Dr. Claire, please wait a little longer." Wait. They asked me to wait again. But this time, it wasn't waiting for someone to finish work or for a phone call. It was waiting for a decision, for a life, for my husband to choose whose life to prioritize. And he had chosen. It wasn't me. 10 minutes later, a new emergency physician arrived and wheeled me into another operating room. As I was placed on the table, I heard him say to Wendy over there, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." I wanted to laugh. He was indeed there, just not by my side. I awoke in intense pain after the anesthesia wore off. Waves of agony radiated from the sutured area of my abdomen, each breath felt as though someone were slashing the wound inside me with a knife. My eyelids were heavy, my hair sticky, I felt as if I had clawed my way back from hell. It took me a full 2 minutes to focus my vision and discern the clock hanging beneath the incandescent light. 4 hours had elapsed since I was taken into the operating room. I was still alive. Yet I didn't know why I should be. Beyond the curtain, someone whispered, "Wendy has been transferred to the ICU now, and Director Henry is still by her side, personally writing nursing records through the night. He treats Wendy differently now." I heard she was his former fiancée, but they called off the engagement. Sigh, what about Dr. Claire? Aren't they still married? Keep your voice down, she's right inside. I moved my fingertips and realized a needle was still in my left hand, the bag half empty. A nurse entered just then, startled to see me awake, and said, "Dr. Claire, you're awake? I'll call someone for rounds immediately." I remained silent. As she changed my dressing, she cautiously asked, "Director Henry doesn't know you're awake yet. Should I notify him?" I turned my head and looked at her. She froze for a moment, then bit her lip and said, "I understand." She left, her footsteps much softer than when she entered, as if afraid to disturb something. I closed my eyes, but tears abruptly streamed down my face. It wasn't for the surgical wound, nor for the 10-minute wait. It was because I suddenly realized that in this world, no one believed he should come to see me anymore. I was once the woman who made him abandon the emergency room and run to me at the corridor's end. We dated for 6 years and were married for 3. 9 years nearly depleted all my patience and passion. I adapted to his irregular hours, holiday overtime, and all-night surgeries, always preparing hot meals for his return. I supported him through promotion setbacks and medical disputes. He called me his only family in this lifetime. Yet at that fork in the emergency corridor, he decided in 2 seconds to save someone else first. I recalled our first year of marriage. We planned a dinner out, but he worked 6 extra hours in the operating room, texting me, "Order takeout, don't wait." I ate cold rice, consoling myself, he's saving lives. The second year, on my birthday, he was on night shift. I brought him a cake at the hospital. He was guiding Wendy in suturing and frowned at me, saying, "What are you doing wandering in the surgical area? You're disrupting order." I froze in place and left the cake on the nurse's station at the corridor's end. That early morning, I walked home alone. The air was cold, but my feet felt numb. The third year, I had a 40-degree fever and called him, trembling. He said, "Wendy can't sleep tonight, I'm chatting with her for a bit. Drink more hot water." I didn't realize then that I had been waiting outside the ward for him to turn back, while Wendy remained on the operating table. I struggled to turn over, the wound pulling until I nearly suffocated, but I finally retrieved the envelope from my bag. The divorce agreement had been drafted long ago. I was merely waiting for him to make a definitive mistake to let me give up entirely. Unexpectedly, he delivered that mistake so decisively. 10 minutes sufficed to determine a surgery's outcome and to end a marriage. I thought I was fortunate, at least I was still alive. But it wasn't until that late night that I understood, being alive doesn't mean I had been saved. On the second night post-surgery, as the anesthesia faded, I was in near-fainting pain. Alone in the ward, I pressed the call button 3 times, but due to aging wiring, no one responded. The bag above me was nearly empty, blood backflow causing my arm to throb painfully. I exerted all my strength to sit up, but my vision intermittently darkened. I feared that if I fell asleep again, I wouldn't wake up. Just as I managed to prop myself up and attempted to get out of bed to seek help, the door burst open. A dust-covered man with a scratched cheek entered and froze in surprise. Why are you still here?" I turned my head with difficulty, recognizing him as the surgical intern on duty that day, Ethan. He rushed to my bedside, and upon seeing the bruised needle marks on my arm and the nearly depleted bag, his expression changed instantly. "Why is no one looking after you? In your condition, you absolutely cannot get up on your own." He slammed the emergency call button, exclaiming, "These are signs of a postoperative infection." I opened my mouth to speak, but he was already on the verge of exploding. Several on-duty nurses hurried in. "Dr. Ethan, it's not that we didn't care, it's that Director Henry ordered no outsiders in this area, saying Wendy needs a quiet environment and fears media attention." Ethan spun around, his voice rising to echo through the ward for the first time. "Then what is she? She's not an outsider, she's a patient. A doctor's wife, someone just off the operating table. She's not medical waste, she's a living person. She's Claire." The nurses exchanged glances. The atmosphere stiffened momentarily. Ethan looked at me, and in that moment, his eyes held not guilt but fury. "If they won't save you, then I will." That night, Ethan nearly carried me to the infectious disease department for a re-examination, personally changing my medication and needles, staying awake for 4 solid hours. I was so weak I could barely speak, yet I vividly remembered one action. Before administering the injection, he carefully avoided the bruised areas on the back of my hand and softly asked, "Does it hurt here?" I was stunned. I hadn't heard that question in a long time. When Henry used to give me injections or bandages, it was always brisk, precise, and efficient, with a doctor's practiced detachment. But I never saw the word pain in his eyes. I thought I was truly resilient, truly enduring. It wasn't until this intern doctor gently said, "It's okay, take it slow," that I realized I wasn't fearless of pain. No one had ever asked if I felt it. As Ethan tucked me in and prepared to leave, I finally spoke. "Thank you." He paused. I looked at him, forcing a faint smile. "Henry is a doctor, but you are a human being." On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the ward door opened again. It was him, Henry. Wearing a neatly buttoned white coat, his mask pulled down to his chin, and a few strands of blood on his shoulder, uncertain whose it was. He carried a bottle of mineral water and a pack of energy biscuits. The moment he stepped in, I heard my heart thud loudly in my chest. Even though I had signed the divorce agreement and convinced myself to let go, I couldn't suppress my instinctual reaction. I struggled to sit up, adjusted the blanket, and tried to keep my voice calm. "Why are you here?" He glanced at me, his eyes devoid of warmth, as if checking if a case was still alive. "Passing by on rounds," he said. "Passing by." I took a shallow breath, feeling a chill in my nose. He approached my bedside, placed the mineral water on the nightstand, and set down the biscuits. "You haven't eaten in days. Replenish your energy," he said, his tone unhurried, like explaining pathology to an intern. I looked at the water bottle, a common supermarket brand, unlike what I used to drink before hospitalization. But I knew that wasn't the point. The point was that the hand offering it was a clean, adept medical hand that had saved countless lives, yet now, in front of me, it felt like a heavy block of ice. I didn't take the water. He frowned. "What, not drinking?" I said slowly, "I'm not thirsty." His tone dropped slightly. "Don't be dramatic. Postoperative dehydration, the doctors told you to hydrate more." I looked up at him. "Do you think that as long as I wake up, I'm still the same Claire as before?" He paused, a hint of impatience surfacing in his eyes. I suddenly laughed, not in mockery, but with a clarity of realization. "On your way here, you stopped by Wendy's ward first, didn't you?" I asked. He didn't deny it, merely saying, "She was emotionally unstable post-surgery, I had to comfort her." "And me?" I looked at him, enunciating each word. "When my life hung in the balance, you made me wait 10 minutes, I've been conscious for 3 days, and you haven't said a word. Now you come, but first comfort her, then drop by to see me. Why not just write 'she's more important' on my bed chart?" Henry's brows furrowed tighter, his voice carrying clear reproach. "Claire, don't make a scene." "Make a scene?" I stared at him, my throat blocked, unable to speak, only managing a faint, cold laugh. I reached out, pushing the water bottle to the bed's edge. With a clatter, it fell to the floor, the cap popped off, and water spilled everywhere. The ward fell into a terrifying silence. Henry's face darkened instantly. "Do you know how busy I am right now? Do you think I have time to play emotional games with you?" I said softly, "Yes, Wendy's emotions are worth more than my life for you to spare 10 minutes. Provoked by my words, he raised his voice. "She's my former fiancée, a martyr's widow. Can't you see it from another perspective? Her psychological state has always been fragile. Secondary stress is our entire department's responsibility." "And me?" I asked calmly. "I'm your wife." He froze. "I was your wife." I lifted the blanket, exposing the still-stitched wound on my abdomen, pointing to the dense web of sutures. "This is the life I fought for myself, not one you gave me. You chose her, that's fine, I'll save myself. But don't come back, don't pretend to care, don't stand by my bed pretending to be human." He stood there, stunned and speechless for a long while. I gazed at him, those eyes that once made me think I could rely on the whole world, now revealing only hypocrisy and arrogance. I said softly, Henry, let's end it here. You've saved so many people, but you never saved me once. I carried the divorce agreement with me for 3 full days. I read it 7 times, recognizing every word, understanding every clause. Finally, I signed my name under name. Ethan was my witness. I could have hired a lawyer, but for some reason, when my head was foggy, the first person I thought of was him. Are you willing to help me with this? I asked him then. Ethan paused, then nodded. It's not helping you, it's accompanying you. He accompanied me to the lawyer's office and the hospital administration building, submitting our marriage registration copy, stamping, and signing. The process was faster than I imagined. 10 minutes. Yes, still 10 minutes. This time, I wised up, I didn't wait for anyone, I saved myself. As Ethan wheeled me out, the sunlight was radiant. A car waited downstairs, driven by his friend. As I settled into the passenger seat, I heard familiar footsteps from upstairs. Someone hurried from the far end of the corridor, slightly out of breath from momentum. I didn't look back. Ethan closed the car door for me. Then I heard someone call my name, Claire. I instinctively wanted to turn but restrained myself. Ethan fastened my seatbelt and whispered in my ear, you don't need to look back anymore. As the car started, something in my heart snapped light and brittle. Meanwhile, Henry stood downstairs from the hospital ward building, staring blankly at the car driving away. His hand remained in his white coat pocket, clutching the cap of the mineral water bottle I'd left behind. Why did she leave? He asked a passing nurse. The nurse gave him an odd look. Dr. Claire was discharged this morning, and the divorce papers were delivered this afternoon. Dr. Ethan left with her. Henry stood there, silent. He looked down at the bottle cap, his palm slightly sweaty. Back in the ward, my medical record book sat on the windowsill, next to the divorce agreement, his copy, awaiting his signature. It bore only one sentence, may you never hesitate to save anyone in the future, but don't forget I, too, was once a person. After leaving the hospital, I thought he'd seek me out again. But 3 days passed with no word. On the 4th afternoon, as I exited the volunteer clinic and approached Ethan's car, he suddenly rushed out and grabbed my wrist. His hand was cold, knuckles white, resembling the hand that once gripped a hemostat at night. Claire. I turned my head, my gaze cool. Shouldn't you be at Wendy's bedside? How do you have time to stage this redemption drama? He didn't speak, just looked at me silently. That look was stranger than silence. After a few seconds, he finally spoke, his voice hoarse, like broken glass scraping his throat. I went to see her. I sneered, and then? Did she cry again? Or did you buy her stronger anti-anxiety meds? He seemed slapped by my retort, his breathing hitched, then he spoke slowly, the second day after surgery, I wanted to see you, but she suddenly fainted, complaining of headaches, palpitations, and sleeplessness. I believed her, thinking it was severe postoperative stress, fearing something would happen. I stayed with her for 3 full days. On the 3rd night, I had an emergency and needed my laptop, so I went to her ward. I saw her sitting on the bed, watching a drama, eating chips, smiling sweeter than during the day. When she saw me, she hurriedly hid everything and started making excuses. Don't misunderstand, I'm just distracting myself. I stood there, somewhat incredulous. He continued, his voice as if dredged from the depths of his chest. I asked her, Wendy, have you been fine all along? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I asked her why. She admitted it, she just didn't want to see you and me together. My breath halted for half a beat. Henry's eyes reddened, his gaze nearly shattering. In that moment, it was like being struck by lightning. Looking at her face, I suddenly recalled many things. Before, she deliberately dragged me to her place to break down and get drunk on your birthday night. Before, she sent me long messages claiming you forced her to resign. Before, she said you were emotionally unstable, might have an anxiety disorder. I actually believed it all. I thought she was sensitive, fragile, needing care, I thought you were too calm, too rational, lacking empathy. I thought I was always helping others. Turns out, I was the one being led by the nose. She wasn't sick. The sick one was me with eyes that couldn't see people clearly, yet thought I was the most rational. I misjudged someone, gave my life to a person acting in front of me, while leaving the one truly bleeding from the car accident waiting for me in the emergency corridor for 10 minutes. His Adam's apple bobbed as he spoke hoarsely. You asked why I came to find you. Because I was wrong. I didn't respond. The wind swept through the parking lot, stirring up flyers on the ground. Ethan stood nearby, silent, subtly shielding me from the breeze behind. Henry looked at me, his eyes filled with near-pleading pain. Claire, can we start over? Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. I looked up, my voice calm to the point of ruthlessness. What I wanted, you wouldn't give me even 10 minutes for now. What right do you have to ask if I want to turn back? He froze. I slowly withdrew my wrist, looking at him and saying deliberately, I think things are fine as they are, Director Henry. He couldn't pinpoint what was off, but he must have noticed I no longer called him by his name. Can we talk? He asked tentatively. Not now. I glanced at my watch. There's 10 minutes until the rehab class. I need to prepare equipment for the kids. He pressed, what about tonight? Tonight, I need to arrange materials for tomorrow's clinic. I smiled. I've been quite busy lately. I didn't say sorry, because I didn't feel apologetic toward him. He stood there like a patient in the wrong department. I suddenly reached into the car, took out a water bottle, and handed it to him. It's been a tough trip, it's hot, have a drink. I paused. He took it, his fingers brushing mine. I neither flinched nor lingered, just offered a quiet, polite smile. He seemed about to speak, but I preempted him. Thank you for coming to see me today. I saw the light in his eyes dim suddenly. Not because I thanked him, but because I said it as if to a stranger. He didn't speak again, just looked at me. I turned and got into the car. The moment I faced away, I heard my heartbeat calm and steady. It turns out, when you no longer love someone, you truly don't even need to avoid them. He came later than I expected, yet mattered less than I'd thought. Before, I longed for him so much my heartbeat dared not stop. Now that he came, I only wanted to say, thank you, please leave. I never imagined Henry would grab me in front of everyone, still less that he'd blurt out in front of the emergency building, Claire, I'm sorry, loud enough to halt the entire corridor. I was carrying a bag of rehab materials, Ethan's jacket draped over my shoulders, about to enter the elevator with him, when Henry called out to me. I didn't stop, but Ethan reacted quickly, holding the elevator door for me. I didn't turn, only saying softly, if you have something to say, you can text me. Henry approached, standing before me, his gaze catching mine unexpectedly, lacking its former certainty and arrogance. I came to take you home, he said. I smiled, not mockingly, but was surprised that he'd say such a thing. I don't have a home anymore, I said, looking at him. Didn't you sign the papers last month? His breath caught, as if struck by my words. I thought, there was still a chance for us. Director Henry, I interrupted softly. Let's not talk about us. The day you pushed me aside, I died once. Later, I realized if no one comes, I have to get up myself. His eyes gradually reddened, his voice lowering. I know I misjudged then, but I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought you could wait. I really thought you were fine. I shook my head. You thought I could endure, so you didn't save me. You thought I wouldn't leave, so you didn't comfort me. You thought I loved you to my core, so you always treated me like an urn. As I spoke, Ethan remained silent, standing half a step beside me like a mute guardrail. Henry glanced at him, then back at me, his voice suddenly tight. Are you with him now? I looked at him without answering. I didn't want to prove anything with "we're not like that." He'd once said during my fever, there's nothing between Wendy and me, yet later chose her. I said only, you don't need to know who I'm with, because you're no longer an option. The elevator arrived, and Ethan wheeled me in. Henry stood there, like an unsaved patient, slowly crouching down. I heard him call me in a suppressed voice, "Claire, don't go." I didn't look back. Because I was already on my own path. At Emperor Kong Hospital's internal training session, I stood on stage, publicly discussing ethical choices in emergency rescue for medical personnel, for the first time. The topic was originally set by Ethan, with me providing supplementary case analysis. But someone added the car accident I experienced, subtly shifting the academic discussion. I could tell some were waiting for me to mention Henry. I didn't. I merely presented a calm timeline of choosing who to save first on the PPT. Then I said, each of you will face such choices in the future. I don't blame anyone, but I won't let anyone define me as expendable either. After I finished, the room was quiet for a moment, then applause followed. Some agreed sincerely, others offered awkward encouragement. Only Henry, standing at the back, remained seated throughout and didn't clap. After the meeting, he caught up with me. "Do you really not blame me?" he asked. I slightly read. "I did," I said. "But I blame myself more for pinning my hopes on you, thinking you'd make an exception for me." He lowered his head, as if slapped hard. "I can clarify that you weren't abandoned then," he said. "I prepared to explain the judgment logic at the next industry seminar to protect you." I genuinely laughed. "Henry, you still don't get it." "I don't need your protection." He froze. I looked at him, my tone utterly calm. "It's not that I don't forgive you, it's that I don't want to rely on you anymore. I can speak for myself, shine on my own, don't stand up for me anymore, because you're no longer the person behind me." He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. I used to always step back behind him, quietly adding to cases, handing him tissues, managing his impatient patients. Now, I stood on stage, my voice steady, logic clear, surrounded by young doctors eager to discuss. They no longer saw me as Henry's wife, but as Dr. Claire. He suddenly asked in a low voice, "Do you really not love me anymore?" I paused for a second, then shook my head. "I don't know," I said. "I just know I don't want to look back anymore." The Emperor Kong Hospital year-end gala was a stage all medical staff anticipated: lights, applause, awards, laughter. I'd sat in the audience countless times, watching him accept awards on stage, basking in the crowd's admiration. Back then, I thought gazing up at him from below was a natural happiness. Now, I sat in the corner, watching him slowly ascend the stage. He was the last to receive an award today, the Special Honor Contribution Award. But he didn't follow the script to accept it. He stood under the lights, microphone in hand, gazing at the crowd. His eyes scanned inch by inch, finally locking onto me. Then he said, "If you'll allow me, I'd like to dedicate this award to one person." Instantly, the room fell silent. The air was so still it almost echoed. He took a deep breath and said, "Claire, I'm sorry. Are you still willing to look back at me?" In that moment, I heard gasps from the crowd, whispers, the head nurse stifling a shocked exclamation. All the lights zeroed in on me. I sat in the 6th row by the aisle, in the plainest work uniform, hair in a loose ponytail, still holding a cupcake from earlier photos. I set the cupcake down, stood, and walked to the stage front, not to respond, but to end this performance. I picked up the microphone and said steadily, "Thank you, Director Henry. But I don't deserve this award. I'm not the one who silently supported you from behind, nor some supremely understanding, heroic spouse. I'm just someone who nearly died the day you turned away." The audience erupted. Henry's face turned ashen. Reaching for the microphone, I turned aside to avoid him. "You treated me as a stage character, but I was just someone waiting for you to save me, abandoned by you." After speaking, I set the microphone down and turned to leave the stage. Ethan stood at the passage, watching me, silent, gently pulling aside a curtain. As I stepped out, no one in the audience dared clap. Henry remained on stage, eyes red, clutching the trophy like a piece of scalding iron. That night after the gala, I received a private message from the dean's office. He wanted to invite me for tea. I replied with 3 words, "No need." I didn't attend the post-gala dinner or address the media's speculation about my counterattack against my doctor husband. I didn't want to clear my name or tear things apart, I just wanted to leave. But before I could leave the hospital, he intercepted me in the parking lot. Henry wore the dark gray suit from the awards, shirt impeccable, face pale as if drained of blood. He said nothing, just stared at me with an unfamiliar, chilling gaze. "Are you satisfied now?" he asked softly. "Have you been waiting for this stage all along?" I looked up at him, truly feeling for the first time that this person was no longer familiar. I said softly, "Henry, why do you always think I'm acting? From start to finish, it's only been you performing." His breathing quickened, fingers trembling slightly. "You didn't used to talk like this. You used to fear embarrassing me, fear me losing face. You've changed." I looked at him and nodded. "Yes, I've changed. Before, I didn't dare cry, fearing you'd think I was emotional. Later, I dared to cry because I still had hope. Now, I don't cry because you no longer matter to me." He stepped forward, gripping my wrist. "Do you really want to cut ties so completely? Claire, do you really not soften at all?" I stared at his hand. He thought I'd flinch or stiffen as before. But I didn't. I calmly stared at his hand, then said faintly, "Let go. You're hurting me." In that instant, I saw his gaze collapse, not in anger, not in shame, but in utter panic. He released me, stepping back, lips pale. "You even tell others when it hurts now," he said. "You used to not even dare let me hear you cry. Have you long stopped needing me?" I looked at him and suddenly smiled. Yes. I used to not dare cry because I saw him as a god, fearing his impatience, his disappointment. Now I finally understood what truly hurt me wasn't the surgical wound or the crash fractures, but the 10 minutes when he turned his back on me. In that moment, a complete me died. That day was the last joint volunteer clinic before Emperor Kong Hospital's relocation. I was an invited speaker. Stepping off the stage, I nearly tripped at the stairs. Before I could steady myself, someone rushed over and supported me. I started, looked up. It was him. Henry. Thinner than last time, with dark circles, lips nearly colorless, his voice hoarse, unlike himself. "Are you okay?" I withdrew my hand. "I can stand steady." He lowered his head. "Sorry." I cut him off. "If you're about to say sorry again, better not." He was silent for a long time, as if gathering his last breath. "Claire, can you not take another step forward? I can't keep up." I turned my head, looking at him, and asked quietly, "Do you remember what you said back then? You said, 'She's in more danger, I can hold on.' Now I'll say something to you." I paused, then said deliberately, "You can hold on too, so I'm leaving." I left. He didn't follow. Perhaps his legs were weak, or he feared another rejection. But whether he chased me or not, I wouldn't look back. Days later, I heard he took leave, joining a medical team in another province for a month and a half. Later, someone said he resigned as director and moved to the post-trauma counseling group. After that, I received a letter. And signed, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was him. It contained one sentence: "You said you no longer need me. But I finally understand I was always the one who needed you." I didn't reply, not because I didn't want to, but because there was no need. He once said I could hold on, so he saved someone else first. Now I truly can hold on, so he no longer has the right to approach me.